Good evening and welcome everybody. This is Obi-Wan Pez for N-Simplex Pachinko. We are doing some review of Building Thinking Classrooms by Peter Liljedahl. We're going to be talking about Chapter 9, how we use hints and extensions in a thinking classroom. As always, we're going to go through and just read more or less what Peter has written. And if anyone has any questions or anything like that, feel free and stop me. As always, we're going to post the link for the book at Corwin Publishing. So corwin.com, Building Thinking Classrooms. If you search for it, if you're at all interested in getting a copy for yourself. I do not recommend that everybody get a copy of this book. Realistically, only those of you out there who are math teachers yourselves enjoy reading about math education or educational methods in general, and anybody who might have a math educator somewhere in their life that this might make a good gift. But if you yourself are a just, math student or something like that, I don't recommend buying the book. Probably leave it to the teachers, or recommend it to the teachers if you're at all interested. But as I said, it would be probably a bit over the top for 99% of the random people who come across this particular video. But who knows? Maybe there will be a new audience for this particular video series by this point. So if you're here on YouTube, welcome. If you're not here on YouTube, you can see these links. We're going to post in our YouTube channels are at Obi-Wan Pez for our gaming content, and at N-Simplex Pachinko 6542 for our math content. If anyone is at all interested in dropping a follow on YouTube, of course, as always, that would be welcome and helpful. And we also have a link for Ko-Fi just over my head. So if anyone is interested in dropping in some money there, that'd be great. It'd be awesome. I don't expect it, so it's always a big surprise if it happens. Okay, so we've been making mention of Chapter 9 for basically the whole rest of the book at this point. So here we are. We're at Chapter 9, how we use hints and extensions in a thinking classroom. So in Chapter 1, the claim was made that curriculum tasks can also be thinking tasks. Yet, with the exception of Chapter 7, every chapter since then has concluded with a non-curricular thinking task for you to use in trying to implement the thinking practice discussed in that chapter. In this Chapter 1, I continue the thread started in Chapter 1 and discuss how curriculum tasks are the main staple of thinking classrooms. By the end of the chapter, you will have learned not only how to craft and sequence curricular tasks for use as thinking tasks, but also how to use hints and extensions to help students think their way through these sequences, and as a result, cover large amounts of content in a short amount of time. So, this does require significant work on the part of the educator. So, be forewarned that if you think, oh, I just have to come up with a loose script based on what I'm already doing, the answer to that is no. You need to rework this from base principles, starting with the ideas that Peter has come up with at this point so far. So start with a non-curricular thinking task that might pair up with whatever it is that you're doing. And this is for every single lesson. So think about the goals of every individual non-curricular thinking task and think about how those might align with some of your lessons throughout the semester. If it's more toward the beginning of the semester, you want something that's going to maybe hold their hand a little bit more. And as you get toward the end of the semester, you're going to want to try something that is a lot more risky. Something that's going to perhaps even stump the students and require them to do some amount of work outside of class in order to solve it. Hopefully, it won't require them to do some amount of work outside of class. Hopefully, it's just going to be something that can be done within the 5 to 15 minutes allotted, but at the same time, maybe it ends up becoming homework, because, let me rephrase that. You should never expect it of the students. You should never tell them that, oh, you need to go and do this. But leave it out there, perhaps, that if anyone is interested, try to make some inroads on this and report back to me next class. This is the sort of thing that my proofs teachers would do, where we get to the end of class, we would have a proof that was started up on the board, and it was invariably unfinished, whatever it might have been. And if it was something that wasn't already necessarily talked about, oftentimes they would say something to the effect of, why don't you give this a shot and come back to me next class? And sometimes it was homework, sometimes it wasn't. It depends on the teacher and the individual situation. If you're doing building thinking classrooms, never expect it of the students. Just say like, hey, this would be a really good way for somebody to, be able to, probably, again, don't make it explicit, but this would make it an interesting way to show your particular prowess with this kind of method. It would be something that would benefit anybody who's thinking about going into the sciences. Because most of the time, students who are going into the sciences are going to need to have those particular skills eventually. So you might as well start them thinking about it now. Okay. Right, so our goal here, no surprise, keep the students thinking. All right, there's a whole bunch of discussion as to why that's important and what's going to happen when you actually get this to work properly. However, I can say for right this second, using hints and extensions is a way to keep students thinking, and you, as the instructor, as the teacher, are going to manage the students in terms of making sure that they are continuing that thought process and never getting to that point at the beginning of the semester. They almost did this every single class, I'm sure, where they stop thinking, where they ask those stop thinking questions. Is this right? Do we have the right idea? That sort of thing. All right, the issue. Mathematics teaching, since the inception of public education, has largely been built on the idea of synchronous activity. Students write the same notes at the same time. They do the same questions at the same time. They get the same hints and extensions at the same time. All right, they always end up getting the exact same information. And again, same words, right? They are doing the same activities across the class at the same time. So this is one of the problems with our institutional norms. Synchronicity is an institutional norm. And no surprise here, what does Peter do in order to ensure, or in order to test, what should we do? What is the optimal teaching practice? He instantaneously realizes that the best thing that we can do for the students is to break the institutional norm. Right, this is a one-size-fits-all education. Also sometimes called assembly line. You as the teacher do your part. You do the same lessons. You talk about the same things every single year, every single subject. You do the exact same stuff that you are supposed to. You do your one job and then you pass it on. Right? A one-size-fits-all education does not take anything into account in terms of the individual students and their individual needs. It does not allow for some students to get ahead and others to be behind naturally. Now, those who are behind, we need to manage to try to get them up to speed as quickly as possible, and ensuring that needs are met for any particular student who has special needs. This is something that you should have taken a class on. It was required of me before I got my teaching certificate in Maryland, which I completed the class, never actually got the certificate for the whole thing, but that was mostly because my letters of recommendation were out of date again. After which I had a job in credentialing. So I got a dose of exactly what those credentialers at the Board of Education were dealing with. Okay, this is an efficient strategy that, on the surface, allows us to transmit large amounts of content to groups of 20 to 30 students at the exact same time. Again, does it really work? No. The one-size-fits-all or assembly line education, that model does not work. It is a product of our industrialization, and it does not fit the modern age whatsoever. If we go under the surface, however, quote, we realize that students' abilities are more different than they are alike.
Hey, what's up, fam? This is Lee Wilson, and summertime is always happening somewhere in the world. That's why my new single, Summertime, the Paolo Barbato remix, is a forever mood. Check it out right now on Spotify.
At least on the whole, right? You may have a single class, especially an honors calculus or something like that in high school, wherein all of the students, or nearly all of the students, are really tightly packed together in terms of their abilities, in terms of their individual knowledge versus their like whole class knowledge. It's not likely, but the more students you have at the honors level, honestly, the more alike they end up becoming. But they're still more different than they are alike for the most part, almost in every case. The idea that every single student can receive and process the same information at the same time is rather outlandish. Decades of work on differentiation is built on the realization that students learn differently and at different speeds, have different mental constructs of the exact same content. What this work is telling us is that students need teaching built on the idea of asynchronous activity. Activities that meet the learner where they are and are customized for their particular pace of learning. Right? We still do need to meet the same requirements for every student. But the idea that we're just going to do one lecture and everybody's going to meet me where I am is just not going to work. Again, that is an industrialization of the classroom. It does not work anymore for our modern age. We know this for a fact. In fact, it never worked, but we were just kind of kidding ourselves that it would work, the students would make it work, or else. And for the most part, our great-great-grandparents all the way down through us, and indeed some of our children even, are dealing with this undifferentiated learning, where you get a one-size-fits-all lecture or activity which only really helps one particular kind of student, and everybody else needs to meet that where it is. It is hard work to do differentiated learning. However, the more you do it, just like any other skill, the faster it becomes, the easier it becomes. So, if you're in a classroom setting, get to it, start thinking about it, get some training on it. You will figure out differentiated learning fairly easily. Again, it's going to take some time, especially at first, and especially if you are somebody who has particular pace of learning and intellectual needs which are different than, what would be considered the mu on this particular normal curve. All right. From a learning perspective, the notion that learners need customized attention and to go at varying paces makes complete sense. But from a teaching perspective, the thought of trying to do this for 20 to 30 students at a time can be overwhelming. Couple this with the need to move every student through large amounts of content with limited contact time, and the idea of differentiated learning for every student seems untenable. And it is, in fact, easier to just go the other way, to say, hey, look, I've got this whole, lecture series that's already done. I could just do this one thing, and then all the students, that's on them. It's their responsibility. Okay. But do you really want your students to pass? Or are you going to decide to be a gatekeeper on this? And yes, I'm serious about this. This particular method is gatekeeping. And it's typically gatekeeping by ableism. If you do this, and I am guilty of it myself, saying that other students or all the students need to meet me where I am, is ableist. It is assuming that the same structure, the same power applies to all people equally. And that is not true. Yeah, it needs an E there. I thought it might. Why, hello, Zach. Good evening and welcome. How's things?
Hey, what's up, fam? This is Lee Wilson, and summertime is always happening somewhere in the world. That's why my new single, Summertime, the Paolo Barbato remix.
We were just discussing how the
Check it out right
assembly line or one-size-fits-all notion of education is gatekeeping by ableism. And if we intentionally engage in that, especially by saying, well, the students need to meet me where my lectures are, this is, unfortunately, an ableist perspective. Not everybody is able to keep up with it. It can also tap into other, for anybody who doesn't know, it can also tap into other systems of power, and then it becomes sexist, racist, homophobic, culturalist, nationalist. It could just be anything, but generally speaking,
Sobe o clima, sente o calor. Requebra no ritmo, sente o amor. Vem no flow, não pode negar. Essa vibe é nossa, pode acreditar. Mexe, remexe sem parar. Essa energia vai te levar. Junto emenda toda uma dança. É o baile que nunca vai acabar.
okay? And we should be working to dismantle these particular systems of power if they exist within ourselves, within our subject, within our institution, within our, as far as we want to go with this, in the name of accessibility. So are we able to allow our particular subject, our particular classes, are we able to get them accessible to all people? And the other word that generally speaking goes with this is going to be equity, not equality, due to the fact that equality is not always equitable, but are we doing everything that we can to ensure that everybody essentially has an actually equal playing field, an equal ability after we have sort of normalized everything? Giving every student in your classroom equal time is not actually fair to those who need you. And even those who don't need you might feel like you're kind of taking up a lot of time and space for me. Either I don't need it, or it could, some people could see it as somewhat insulting, being like, come on, I'm good. But others will also be like, thank you for spending your time on me. However, other people need you more. So there's a couple of different ways. There's many different ways of looking at it, but so we want to constantly be thinking about all of the individual systems of power that exist within our classroom, institution, etc., within our subject, and try and dismantle those as best we can to make sure that everyone has access and everyone has equitable access. All right. Okay, so the idea of differentiated learning for every student may seem untenable, and again, it's much easier to not do it. However, this is not to say it can't be done. There are scores of teachers who have effectively differentiated their classroom instruction and provided customized learning opportunities for each of their students. Their students, in turn, are reaping the benefits of the individualized learning afforded by these teachers' efforts. Regardless, if differentiation is something that you have or have not been able to achieve in your teaching, the question remains, how does it look in a thinking classroom where students spend much of their time thinking in groups? The other bit that I wrote in the margins here was that my classroom had a 30-minute requirement of meet with me. And generally speaking, it was meet with me for at least 30 minutes during the first 2 to 3 weeks. All right, reason being, this helps you understand who the student is as a greater, helps you greater understand who the student is and where they're coming from. So you try to tease out those kind of differentiations that exist between all of the individual students. I had a bunch of questions. I had a bunch of talking points and topics of discussion that we could end up like running through. A student would ask me a few questions. I would talk with them. This also helps the socialization of this particular student if, for instance, they had a lot of time during COVID where they were just completely locked away from everybody else and lost some of their social skills. Now, for some students, this is like absolute hell, and they would absolutely not want to do this. So it being tied to their grade was maybe a little mean, but at the same time, it was an easy amount of points for most of the students, anybody who didn't have particular social anxieties. And it also helped the students who did have a little bit of anxiety be like, okay, well, he's human, so that's nice. And, you know, he's Professor Obi here is at least not just going to fail me because, right? I genuinely want you to succeed in my class. I would like to have a discussion about where you're coming from. What are your goals? What's your major? What are you planning on doing with the rest of your life? What are you planning on doing for the next 20 minutes? Like, okay, bad example. Talk with you. That's the only... Right, what are you planning on doing for the next day or two? What's some stuff that you're doing? What's your family like? You know, anybody who would open up to just about any of these topics would be able to have a discussion. We'd be able to get past the initial awkwardness, and then they'd be like, "Oh, okay, this is all right. You know, I can do okay here." Even somebody who has genuine mathematical anxiety, or anxiety about power, really, is what a lot of this is. Somebody like me has a lot of power over them because I am in charge of their grade and all this other stuff. And this is the other thing about building thinking classrooms. We'll come back to this a bit later, but students are, for the most part, in charge of their grade. They know when they have succeeded, and they know when they have failed. And failure is an option. Failure is an inevitability in almost every case. And you just, get a little better, come back again. No big deal. But we'll talk more about grading stuff in the next few chapters after this. I can't remember exactly what it is, but we'll look. Might as well poke back to the front here and... There it is. And nope. There we go. How do we choose to evaluate, use formative assessment, and grade? So 12, 13, 14, the last 3 weeks of this stuff. All right. Quote, as indicated in Chapter 1, thinking and engagement are closely related. If we're thinking, we're going to be engaged. And if we're engaged, generally speaking, we're also thinking. Although thinking is a private and invisible process, engagement has a physicality that is easily observed and easily identified. Right? Engagement has physicality. As such, engagement is a methodological tool that can be used to see when students are thinking. More than this, however, engagement is a pedagogical tool that can be used to build thinking classrooms. Right? Engagement will be a useful stand-in for thinking. Okay. To see this, we need to go back to the early 1970s and look at the work of Hungarian-born psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Who was working at the University of Chicago. At this time, Csikszentmihalyi was very interested in understanding something that he referred to as the optimal experience. Mihaly. I have to ask Balint. We may have to look up some of his papers, see if they're available online. most likely, but you know. These are from 1990, 96, and 98. 1990, quote, "A state in which people are so involved in an activity that nothing else seems to matter. The experience is so enjoyable that people will continue to do it, even at great cost, for the sheer sake of doing it." Alright, so this one's from 1990, talking about the optimal experience. The optimal experience is a form of intense engagement we are all familiar with. It's that moment we're so focused and absorbed in activity we lose track of all time. We're undistractable. We're consumed by the enjoyment of the activity. As teachers, we see rare glimpses of this type of engagement in our students when the bell rings and they are reluctant to leave. This happens every so often, true. It kind of depends on what it is. Again, typically happens more often with honors students who, you know, they hear the bell, but they're so engaged in the learning process, the activity that's at hand, whatever it might be. It's just like, yeah, okay, I will deal with the bell in a minute. Certainly happened to me a few times. Wanting to understand this rare and powerful phenomenon, Csikszentmihalyi studied people he thought were most likely to have experiences with it: musicians, artists, athletes, scientists, and mathematicians. Over time, he gathered enough cases of the optimal experience that he could begin to start looking for patterns, and patterns he found. Some people might call this like induced ADHD of the particular variety of hyperfocus. That may not be exactly the best way to put it, but somebody put it like that to me, and I was like, I've seen hyper-focused individuals who have ADHD, and it's sort of kind of like that, but not, maybe not quite induced. Okay. For example, he noticed that whenever someone had an optimal experience, they lost track of time. Again, this is whenever somebody had an optimal experience, usually they would lose track of time. Much more time passed than the person realized, and they noticed that when Csikszentmihalyi noticed that also the people were undistractable and unaware of things in their environment. So speaking of which, I'm about 11% the way through my book club book. I need to become undistractable tomorrow. Right, the third thing that typically happens right? The undistractability and unawareness of their environment, typically, those things would interfere with their focus on whatever it is that they're doing. So they would, again, subconsciously, essentially, block out everything else. Third, he noticed that their actions became seamless and efficient extension of their will. So whatever they want to happen just kind of happens because they're so focused on what's happening. All of their actions are just absolutely seamless. They just do. They think, this is what I want, and their body just does. They become less self-conscious and stop worrying about failure. Or at least less concerned about failure, but nonetheless. And they were doing the activity for the sake of doing it themselves, just for the sake of doing it. That was actually a separate one, but whatever, it's fine. They become less self-conscious, they become unconcerned with failure, and the activity becomes an end unto itself. So we're no longer concerned with specifically doing this activity because the teacher said so, doing this activity because it's graded, doing this activity because whatever. There are no reasons to do this particular activity other than just to do this activity. So this is the optimal experience that Csikszentmihalyi is trying to describe. Now you notice that all of these things are rather internal changes. These are things which happen inside the person's own body. So these characteristics, like thinking, are all internal and to the doer, and as such invisible to the observer.
Sharing intimate photos of her without her consent.
Unwanted touching, unwanted comments, unwanted nudes.
Controlling what she can and can't wear.
Controlling who she can and can't see.
Threatening her.
However, he noticed that whenever there was an optimal experience, there were also 3 qualities that were present in the environment in which the optimal experience was taking place. So these things led to the realization that, 1,
Calling all spinners. Join Sky Vegas, the online casino, where we offer new players 50 free spins to use in your first 7 days, and 200 more when you deposit and spend £10 with
the person has clear goals every step of the way and can communicate them.
Sky Vegas. Play. It's why we're here. 18 plus free spins loaded on first eligible game. Game and eligibility restrictions and further T's and C's apply. BeGambleAware.org.
At least, most people are able to communicate what their goals are. 2. There is immediate feedback on one's actions. So, if you're doing something wrong, you'll notice it because it's obvious, right? Like, you end up doing a math problem the wrong way. You'll get a step somewhere in there that's like, wow, that doesn't make any sense. Let's go back and try to figure it out. And 3, there is a balance. There's a balance between the doer's ability and the task's challenge. So, unlike the first 6 characteristics, these things are external to the doer, and as such are observable and recreatable.
I just wanted to let you know I miss you. I know we haven't spoken in a while. Things have been weird. But I still
That's recreatable across student groups.
do you think about me?
The third of these environmental characteristics, the balance between challenge and ability, is central to Csikszentmihalyi's analysis of the optimal experience and comes into sharper focus when we consider the consequences of having an imbalance in the doer's ability and the task's challenge. They're likely to experience... Oops. Wow, I just skipped a whole bunch right there. So...
Do you think about me?
Okay? When the doer's ability exceeds the task's challenge, then the doer is going to be able to do this easily. And if asked to repeat it, they're going to start getting bored because, like, well, I've already done it. So, like, what's the point? Why do you want me to do it again? So typically, a student becomes bored when their ability exceeds the challenge. And when the task's challenge exceeds the doer's ability, this is where we see students who then look at this task and say, it is futile to attempt to do this because I don't understand. And they start becoming frustrated. So these are the 2 things to watch out for. The indicators that there is an imbalance in number 3, the doer's ability, and the task's challenge is boredom and frustration. If the student becomes bored, then you need to give them a harder challenge. If the student becomes frustrated, then you don't need to give them an easier challenge, but you can give them hints. The idea here is that you're not going to retract what you've given them unless you literally gave them the wrong problem. But even then, you could say, you know what, I gave you the wrong problem, but I'm pretty sure that you could still do this. What if? And that's like number one. If you could find a what if question that highlights what exactly is going on without giving them a huge push, it just gives them a little tiny nudge in the right direction. So what would it be like? What if that sign over there wasn't positive? What do you mean wasn't positive? Okay, that means it could be negative. And the more astute student would also say, well, okay, that also means it could be 0. So let's see what happens if we let it be positive and negative and 0 in 3 different cases. What's going to happen? Okay, when a student becomes bored, you give them a greater challenge. And so we can see in Peter's stuff here, we're going to give them a greater challenge by increasing the difficulty by saying we're going to, and in fact you could do the exact same thing as the hint that I gave there. Hey, so what if, I know we have like 6 examples where they're all positive. What would it be like if either of those signs was a negative? And then just walk. All right, you've increased the challenge. Hopefully you've given them a prod in the right direction for, a phenomenon that they should investigate. And then as it turns out, that's like the whole next couple of sections. Try to come up with a generalization in terms of what kinds of things do we see versus what kinds of things do we do here. Okay, we got 6 minutes. Ads are going to start in a little bit, so just a quick warning there. Okay, when there is balance, between challenge and ability, then the students enter what is usually called a flow state. So you all have definitely seen it if you've been around this channel at all, especially on the gaming nights, where I will just play, let's say, Satisfactory for 6 hours at a time, blowing through all of the ads and not even acknowledging that, hey, maybe chat... I mean, usually I acknowledge when chat says something, eventually. Or Famish tags me with a shame.
Sometimes you just want something a bit extra to satisfy your cravings.
But you could see it in people, and you probably could see it in yourself, that you would enter a flow state when this happens. Right? Is there a preferred activity you have? Does that preferred activity cause you to lose track of all time? Does it cause you to completely blank out the rest of the world and do the things that you're doing just seem like they just happen. They're just bam. You want this to happen and then it does. Are you self-conscious about doing this activity, or are you self-conscious about like what other people might think about the ways in which you're doing it? So for instance, in my satisfactory runs, right? Sometimes I'm a little self-conscious about how ridiculously unorganized it is, and eventually I know I'm going to have to go back. Are you concerned with failure or unconcerned with failure when this thing happens? Is just doing the activity just kind of the reason you're happy at the moment? If so, congratulations. You've been in a flow state. Okay. Flow is the term that Csikszentmihalyi used to encapsulate the essence of optimal experience and the aforementioned elements into a single emotional cognitive construct. So, we will be back after ads. We'll talk more about flow state and kind of come up with a visual representation and I think there was a thing in here. One, 164. Man, that's way ahead. Yeah, alright. That's part of the FAQ section, so we'll come back to it. Anyway, thank you everybody for coming. I'm going to take a 3-minute break and walk around, cycle water, do whatever needs to be done, and we will see you again in approximately 3 minutes. So hang on in there. We'll see you soon, and thanks so much for coming. My name's Obi-Wan Pez, just in case you haven't been here before, and this is N-Simplex Pachinko. See you in 3.
I'm gonna get you, gonna make you fall in love with me, you want more. Yeah, but you never had a better way, I do it all. I'm gonna get you, gonna make you fall in love with me, you want more. Yeah, but you never had a better way, I do it all. you, gonna make you fall in love. Yeah, but you never had a better way. I do it all. I'm gonna get you, gonna make you fall in love with me. You want more? Yeah, but you never had a better way. I do it all. I'm gonna get you, gonna make you fall in love with me. You want more? Yeah, but you never had a better way. I do it all.
Food snobs get up to £50 off IKEA kitchen and dining until the end of the week. So can people who don't like coriander. And people who air fry everything. Anyone can get up to £50 off online or at IKEA Leeds. Even competitive bakers. Simply sign up to IKEA Family. IKEA, the wonderful everyday. Available from 8th to 28th of September on kitchen and dining products. Minimum spend £50 for full TNCs. Visit ikea.co.uk/TNC.
Bet365 are putting the
Max 12 legs for Bet Builder. Features apply on eligible player or fixture markets. Bet restrictions, T's and C's and exclusions apply. Eligible customers only. 18 plus. Please play responsibly. Visit gambleaware.org.
I don't wanna know the truth. If it brings me solitude, I'm drowning into life from now, but I can't breathe without you in my arms. I feel
All right, welcome back, everybody. My spouse just reminded me that our daughter came into our room super early in the morning a couple nights ago in tears and wondering if she could have a hug because she had a bad dream in which none of us remembered who she was. It was like, oh, kiddo. And this being like, I don't know, 5 in the morning. Like, yeah, that's probably pretty stressful. Okay. So, at this point, Csikszentmihalyi's research on flow goes in a completely different direction. So, Peter decides that building thinking classrooms needs to kind of dovetail with this research right here. So, in essence, flow is where engagement and, as a consequence, thinking happens. So, if thinking is going to happen in this particular area, then we'll like to figure out how to maximize students' ability to think in the classroom at any given moment. And in order to build the thinking classroom, we need to be able to get students into and keep them in this flow state. So again, now how do we keep them there for the main part of the lesson? There are other parts of the lesson. Again, we had our earlier on stuff was all about the non-curricular thinking tasks, right? Getting students to think about something for extended periods of time. Later on, we're going to do something called consolidation, which is making sure that all the students are now able to get the same stuff. So this is where the concerns that we brought up earlier end up being addressed, right? That should be next week, I think. But for this week, again, how do we keep these students in the flow state so that they are not concerned with their self-consciousness, with what time it is? Like, you can keep track of time, they don't need to worry about it. So how can we ensure that students are in this flow state for as long as possible? So we could represent a two-variable graph, right? Challenge and ability. So if students' ability is to exceed the challenge of a particular problem, let's say this is like our optimal experience, right? If a student's ability outstrips the challenge of the problem, then again, the issue here is that the students experience boredom. If the challenge outstrips their ability, then they experience frustration. And this is that magical area in here where any sort of experience within this section is going to be that flow state. Flow is this dynamic space, and it's not always predictable, but again, if we can replicate the experiences above, if we can get these students to, lose track of time, etc., then we can start getting individuals into this flow state, and we could figure out how to manage the whole class so that hopefully every single person will experience something along these lines at some point. Hopefully every day, but possibly we just have to go for on a day-by-day basis. Let's see what happens. Okay, so and I shouldn't say if, as a student works on a task and learns, their ability begins to increase. And again, if they're given the exact same tasks over and over and over again, then their ability is going to increase, but the challenge does not, right? They're not given any extra tasks or anything like that. So let's say the student is here again, their ability will increase as they start working on this thing. And eventually the challenge needs to be increased again. So in essence, when students are in flow, the ability will always be increasing, and in order to keep them in flow, we as teachers need to be increasing the challenge by then giving them extensions. Expansions? Extensions.
At least I don't have to listen to Dave banging on about his f***ing air fryer. Ooh, it's got a 3 kilo load capacity, Dave. Whoop-de-f***ing doo. Ooh, come to Papa. I'll take that.
Wherever you go to let go, save up to 50% with cross-country
Right, go like this.
standard
0.
advance tickets.
That's
Cross
1.
country.
That's
Take
2.
us on your journey.
That's
T's and
1.
C's apply.
That's 2.
See cross-country website for details.
So, teacher may give them extensions to increase the challenge rating of that particular task. And you make it harder and harder every time so that the challenge keeps increasing. However, we do not want to, naturally, if a task is too challenging, this leads to frustration. So don't just jump to the bottom of the list. Go to the list of tasks that you have for students and see what is going to be appropriate for that particular student's group for that particular moment. Explain to me what's going on here and try to get a grasp on how you can make each individual task tailored to that group's current ability level and challenge rating. So where are they? Where do they need to be? Those of you who are experienced at being D&D GMs, right? Tailor the experience of your table by changing up. Don't give them the same creature over and over to kill. That's boring. Don't give them a challenge which is too high. That's frustrating. Hey, what do you know? It works the same way. Right, so sounds simple enough, but the problem is that timing matters. If we increase the challenge of a task before the student has had the chance to fully grow into the ability, then rather than keeping them in flow, we push them up into frustration. And likewise, if we wait too long to increase the challenge, then we push them into boredom. So we keep having to keep this dance going for every single student and every single group in the entire room, which is, of course, going to be a challenge. So if we manage to get our students into flow, giving them extensions synchronously will not work. You can't just give everybody the same challenge increase, the same challenge at the same time, because not everybody's ready. We have to work asynchronously. We have to get the timing right for every student. If students are working individually in their seats, that's almost impossible. Fortunately, the thinking classrooms have two things that make this easier. First of all, they're in random groups. This reduces what we need to manage asynchronously from 20 to 30 students to 7 to 10 groups. Secondly, students work on vertical non-permanent surfaces. This makes it easier to observe where the groups are in their thinking, and it makes it easier for us to get the timing. Right? Visible at a glance. Can increase challenge or give hints at a moment's notice. Right, and randomize groups. Helps students communicate more effectively. And they can give each other hints by just being able to say, how did you do this particular step? Why is it that, you guys came up with this answer? What is this particular method? I don't understand. Whatever. They can end up getting hints from other groups by doing this communication with other groups. In addition, you're, again, only giving seven to 10 groups worth of individualization. Or, differentiated learning. You're only managing 7 to 10 groups and not 20 to 30 students. So already, this is a huge time saver because you should have, as individual students who are working individually, you should have been doing this as individuating or individualizing or differentiating your instruction. You should have been doing this for 20 to 30 students. Now, some of them you probably wrote off and were just like, okay, well, this student's going to be doing X anyway. These groups over here already get it. So I don't have to really worry too much about it. Well, you probably should have. You could give them greater challenges. You could have given them greater challenges. Tomorrow, you could give them greater challenges. Because they are ahead of the curve. Whereas the people who are average on the challenge rating where you currently are teaching, those are the people you're kind of juggling to say, okay, do they get it, don't they? And then you have the other students whose ability is not meeting the challenge, and these students are getting frustrated. And you need to help them differentiate your instruction to help them more effectively, to get them to have more hints. Okay, but again, if you're doing this in 7 to 10 groups rather than 20 to 30 individual students, you're lessening your load, and you're also allowing those students to help each other understand. And eventually, the students who get it are going to not just give the other students the answer or give them blatant hints. It's going to be almost like, you all coming into my channel and watching me play a puzzle game. A lot of you know exactly what I'm talking about here, where you're like, hey, would you like a hint? And throw out something that's just like, have you thought about using all of your tools? Like, oh, what tools do I have? Let's go through the list. Right? Because then it'll help to be like, okay, I'm doing the work now of going through the list and saying, what tools do I have available? Rather than you saying, hey, use your radio. Right. You don't want to do that when you're trying to give people individualized attention and differentiated instruction. Don't just say, use the quadratic formula. You say, what do you have at your disposal? What tools have you learned about recently? Oh, the quadratic formula. Okay, why should that work in this case? When are you allowed to use it? Right? Get somebody to try and understand it. And then the students will start doing that for each other as well, eventually. Usually. There's some people who just want to, move it along. So they will sometimes give stuff away, which they're not supposed to, but it's okay. Right, and that particular student, if you do have one of them, you can pull them aside and say, hey, look, I appreciate what you're doing. You're trying to help the student, but have you ever played Outer Wilds? That's definitely what you should ask them. Anyway, aside from maintaining the balance between ability and challenge, we also have to remember that Csikszentmihalyi found 2 other environmental conditions for optimal experience to occur: clear goals at every step and immediate feedback on action. When we combine these 3 conditions together, we can see why certain other thinking tasks that we talked about before, the jelly beans from Chapter 4, the tax collector from Chapter 6, and the birthday cake from Chapter 8 tasks worked so well with our students. Each of these tasks has a clear goal. Each of these tasks offers the possibility for immediate feedback on action. And in fact, for the jelly beans and the birthday cake tasks, the feedback is provided by the task itself. The solution either worked or it didn't. And finally, each of these tasks offers us the ability to increase the challenge as students complete a level. So, if we were talking about, for instance, like the number of ways that you can divide a pizza, right? This would also potentially be a hint for something like that, where you say, here's an easier problem to think about. What if this wasn't a cake? What if it was just a pizza? How many pieces could we cut this into? Blah, blah, blah. Do all this stuff. Okay, cool. Now, and this is not actually the question that I'm realizing, was not the birthday cake question, but nonetheless. There are pizza numbers and there are cake numbers in mathematics. So, like, in how many different pieces can we make by making a certain number of cuts? Right, this is a bit different. Nonetheless, still works. And if somebody's struggling with, like, the birthday cake problem, how many cuts do we make versus how many pieces do we make? They can think about the easier problem. Hey, here's a hint. Why don't you think about the pizza problem? How many different ways can you cut a pizza with n cuts to get some number of slices? Right? What's the maximum number of ways that you can, or what's the maximum number of slices you can get? from this many cuts. All right. Same principles can be applied to the idea of curricular thinking tasks, introduced in Chapter 1. So, consider a task with high school students that begins with the script. Let's start with a bit of review. How would I expand x plus 2 times x plus 3? Teacher writes this on the board. Students come up with x squared plus 5x plus 6. Okay, cool. Teacher writes on the board. What factors could we have? In fact, you don't even need to say anything at this point. This task already has a clear goal without saying anything. Figure out what the two binomials are that, when multiplied, will produce the desired trinomial. Also, by the fact that students use distribution to check their answer, the task has the ability to provide immediate feedback. Oops. Right? Immediate feedback by using distribution, which they already know because we established it just seconds ago, right? We already said, how do you expand this? Oh, cool, thanks. I put this on the board. Don't even have to say anything. Students be like, ah. And yes, you would formally invite them to do something like this by essentially saying, go. As you walk around the room, here you're just going to get the students to explain to you why exactly does this work. Now, I would probably say that don't even get the students to explain this one. Right? Consider the following sequence of extensions, which is what are missing from this lesson, right? Here's the extensions for all students to be able to work on. This sequence was created using two main principles of variation theory by Marton and Tsui, 2004. The first principle is that we can only see variation against a backdrop of non-variation. Uh, 2004, not 14. That is, before something changes, it has to stay the same. So, we see this in the transition from task 4 to task 5. Prior to making the third coefficient negative, our constant, we kept it positive for 4 tasks. Second principle is that only one thing is varied at a time. right? So what we do is we give them one task at a time. We say, okay, here's the next one. Factor this polynomial. Give them the polynomial. After a couple, 2, 3, a lot of the students are going to get it. Don't let them get bored. Change it up. If a particular group does not get it, or they're kind of struggling with it, it takes them a while to get the first one, the second one, the third one, they'll want to do all 4. Okay, so although task 14 is very far removed from task number 1, at every stage only one thing was varied from the one above it, if at all. First, we varied the number of factors that the third coefficient provided. Then we made the third coefficient negative. Then the second coefficient became negative, and so on. Although inspired by variation theory, this is very similar to the idea of number strings. Fosnot and Dolk, 2002. Yes, these are people's names. When we've used this sequence, or one similar to it, with grade 10 students, we get through the entire sequence between 40 and 60 minutes. Right, there were 14 individualized tasks, and here they're talking about variation of where the sign, or which sign is positive and negative, which particular factors they have, all that stuff. The 14 tasks took them between 40 to 60 minutes. So that's your main part of the lesson. If you have 75-minute lessons, perfect. On the money. If you have only 50-minute lessons, which was the case in my high school, then maybe we're getting, after 40 minutes, we're done, and we have to consolidate. We have to do the other parts of the lesson. But nonetheless. That is, depending on the curriculum, we are able to cover the entire factoring quadratics unit in one lesson, and without necessarily having to prod them along and give them all the same thing at the same time and check everybody, and give them the same thing at the same time and check everybody. Here, instead, we diversify what information is around the room. We get every individual student to check all of the ones on this list. Every group, make sure that they do all of them on this list. Maybe if a group starts getting bored, switch it up on them.
Chase is the digital bank you can rely on with helpful 24/7 customer service.
So I can speak to a real person anytime.
Of course, even when you're on holiday and it's the middle of the night back home. And there's a handy 1% cashback on everyday transport.
So how's this possible? The short answer is that when students are not thinking, everything we teach them is difficult, no matter what it is. They don't want to do it. It's hard. When students are thinking, however, almost anything is possible. When the students are thinking, they're learning, they're understanding, and this transfers to success. So get them
Max 12 legs for bet builder. Features apply on eligible player or fixture markets. Bet restrictions, T's and C's and exclusions apply. Eligible customers.
Again,
18 plus.
keeping them there is using those hints and extensions. To sustain, flow. So this is bringing all of these ideas together to finally say this is all the stuff that we need to do. Okay, this is where you start to earn back that time where a lot of the teachers think they've wasted the first couple of weeks of class. No, that is not what we're doing. This is where you earn back that time doing non-curricular thinking tasks for, again, day 1, maybe day 2, maybe day 3. It kind of depends on how long you've got. To be clear, this is not something that you can do on day 1. You absolutely cannot. All right, maybe with adult learners who have already experienced something very similar to this. But chances are they haven't, especially if you're watching this in 2020, well, the 2020s. Hell, let's just call it. If you're watching this anytime in the 2020s, most likely none of your students have ever experienced anything like this. It is possible if your professional organization caught onto this, NCTM in the States, Amatic, etc., caught onto this and started pushing it to anybody who would listen, like they did for me. It is possible you might have started this in 2021, like I did. No, 2022. Phew. Oi. Right? I spent all of 2023 trying to adjust everything to make sure that I could get my entire class fitted into this format. Didn't quite work, but that's mostly because I just hadn't read the entire book by the time I needed to start it. Well, that's not quite true. Right? My spring semester, I hadn't quite read the whole book. By the time the fall semester ran around in 2023, I had read the whole book. I had almost set up my entire class to make sure that this worked. But there were still remnants of the old system in the new system. And I gotta tell you, this is one of the things that killed me. The other being my terrible organization. But you cannot do this on day 1. Again, if these students have never seen anything like this before. Your first day, 2, week, whatever, again, should be dedicated to non-curricular thinking tasks. And once you get them into the flow of doing non-curricular thinking tasks, then we could start sneaking in the curricular tasks as the second thing we do in class. All right. Once your students are thinking individually and collaboratively, a sequence such as the one we talked about here with the quadratics, used asynchronously to maintain the balance between ability and challenge, allows you to cover huge amounts of content in a single lesson. All right, so 1 and 2 step solving of algebraic equations at the middle school level. Here's a sample script. Alright, we're going to play a game of guess what's in my head. I'm going to think of a number, and you are going to guess what it is. To help you make the guess, I will give you exactly 1 hint. Okay, I've got my number. Here's your hint. If I add up 3, or if I add 3 to my number, the answer is 12. Thumbs up if you know my answer, or if you know my number. Around the room, of course, everybody's like, yeah. Okay, what's my number? 9. Okay, great. So, I have a new number. Here's your hint. If I double it and add 3, my number is 15. Thumbs up if you know my answer. When enough thumbs are up. Okay, what's my number? 6. Alright, cool. Before I give you the next one, we have to learn how to write what I just said. And before I give you the next one, there are 3 rules. 1, and you don't write this. You may use a calculator. 2. If you use the calculator. You must write down your keystrokes. And 3. You have to check your answer by putting it back into the calculator. So, here's your next one. Nope, this is also verbally. Remember what we said earlier. You don't want to put this on the board and have students walk in and then just be like, that's the task. Cool. You want them to not be able to figure out exactly what it is that you're doing from anything that you wrote. Now, other students may be writing this stuff down. So you say, okay, I have a number. I'm going to add 3.014, and my solution is 7.22. What's my number? Randomize, go. Okay, and then the extensions are going to be blank minus 15.1 is equal to 7.88. Blank times 4.25 is equal to 24.8. Blank divided by 1.356 is equal to 4.02. And blank times 2.5 plus 3.67 is equal to 18.3, and it goes from there. This sequence, like those before it, adheres to the 2 principles of variation theory. Variation can only be seen against a backdrop of non-variation, and only one element should be changed at a time, or varied at a time. We have used this to exact script and a similar sequence to move through all of solving 1- and 2-step equations in a single lesson. So yet again, this is one of those things where you're going to make back this time if you choose to do this and you find the right script to make it work. That's the trick, of course. You've got to be able to find a way to make this work, and you have to do it. I have personally taken a thinking grade 5 class through this script, and sequence in 35 minutes, by the end of which every group was solving stuff as complicated as blank divided by 15.3 minus 8.27 equals 3.01. In our research, we've been able to recreate these results hundreds of times, and every time we move through huge amounts of content in a single lesson. This is not to say that every group gets equally as far, but every group gets to the point where they're solving two-step equations or factoring quadratics where the lead coefficient is greater than 1. The groups that get here sooner are given increasingly harder and harder questions beyond this to keep them in flow state while the rest of the groups catch up.
I need posters, socials, and a presentation by Friday. Oh, I'm swamped.
Try Adobe Express.
Okay.
It's fast, with thousands of high-quality templates, stock images, and fonts. You can even
Consider a sequence adapted from the unusual baker task.
AI features help turn
Hey Zach,
text prompts into
A
images.
grid of the one was always the hard get. Yes. And that's the thing, right? If the students have seen, if they've seen every single type of x squared plus or minus bx plus or minus c, right? And these are not tied to each other, right? So if they've seen every combination, without telling them necessarily, we would have to go back, first of all, to what about this case, right? What would we need to do here in order to make this happen? So the students would be able to see, okay, if we go like this, then we know that we're going to get x's in both places. We know that this stuff, just like before, has to be both pluses. Now, what do we do in terms of, you know, we're only going to get... we have to get a 2 in one of these places, right? And then we have to get a 1 or a 3 or a 3 or a 1 in those last places because they've already seen this. So, like, I know it's easy for me to say that, but if students have seen all of the examples before this, they've done all pluses, all minuses, all with a coefficient of 1, then giving them the first example again, but now we've split the factors of that last number into a 2 and a 3, right? They may not be able to figure out they may not be able to figure out the last bit, the part that I want them to get. The part that I want them to get is going to be, okay, this is going to look like this. Oops. Right? That's what I would want them to get eventually. That's not going to happen immediately. But they're going to be able to, I suspect, come up with this if they've done every possible combination above, because they know what the original x squared plus 5x plus 6 looks like, and they've worked through the challenge of all the other combinations that we've seen before. I would have faith in this particular group, if they went through this, that they would be able to figure this one out. That's just me. Maybe I need to have my mind broken. But, like I said, it seems like they should be able to figure that one out, if by no other means than guess and check. Because they know how distribution works, so therefore they should know that okay, these need to be put in some combination. What's that combination going to be? I would be willing to bet they would get it. Again, they have to have seen every combination of x squared plus bx plus c with pluses and minuses in all those places. All the different combinations. And then that is the first one I would probably give them. Because again, it's the first example over again. And definitely using, you know, prime factors as A and C. Because otherwise that's just mean. Now, I'm especially fond of 2x squared, 5x, and 3, because if you take 2x squared plus 5x minus 3, this is a, you know, very fun issue. This is because our AC is -6, and so there are two different combinations which, when you add them, asterisk, you end up getting pluses or you end up getting 5. So here, the important part is that we're going to have opposite signs on these. And so if it's opposite signs that add up to 5, only -1 and +6 will work to get us +5. Whereas in the other case with 2x squared plus 5x plus 3, only 2 and 3 will work in order to get us +5. So using the exact same numbers, but then you just flip one of the signs. And yes, arguably that's not the same number, but that's not the point. You're using the same value on every A, B, and C, but now we just flip one of the signs, and it gets us a different result. I love that example. It's so great. Right, adapted from the Unusual Baker Task, NCTM 2012, that can be used in upper elementary school classroom on the topic of fractions. The premise is that the baker cuts their cake in different ways every day. What fraction of the cake is each of the pieces? Alright, so task 1, asterisk, assume all cuts are evenly done. Assume that all of these cuts are actually well made. Right, so here we're saying that the, what fraction of the cake is each piece. Obviously, every student, if they understand fractions, is going to say that, oh, okay, these are all 1/4 each. Cool, we like it. Okay, so then we take number 2 on the list, and we say, okay, number 2 says what we have here is that line and that line. Okay, number 3 is going to be that line and that line. Number 4 it's going to be there. Number 5. Ooh, uh-oh. And number 6. Well, we could do more examples. We could keep doing these pretty much all day. But right, so this is the kind of example that we'd see here, where we got, okay, this is number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6. Right, so in order to assess how the students are doing with fractions, go through each of these examples in order, and the students have to figure out what fraction of the overall cake is each of these things going to be. Again, assuming that all of these cuts are actually accurate and aren't just some sort of artifact. Now, I grant you, right, I'm not a particularly good drawer, even with these paint tools here that I've got going on. So, with these, anybody could go through, hopefully, and be able to say, okay, I understand how all of these things end up working to make the bigger picture. And again, we're giving them all slightly increasing in challenge and allowing them to increase in ability as they start adding all of the constituent parts. They start saying, okay, well, if we know that the first one is all 1/4, number 4 here, we're just combining 3 of them. Okay, that's 3/4. Okay. So each of the sequences of curriculum tasks has another quality that is common among them. The increase in challenge from one task to the other is incrementally small. In other words, we're just pushing the envelope a little bit in each step, which keeps the students in flow and reduces the chance of pushing them into frustration by making cognitive leaps too challenging. Peter refers to these as thin slicing.
You get a handy 1% cashback on everyday transport.
Like on my bus fare when I'm heading to that festival.
Roger that. Join millions of customers and see what your money can do with Chase. Search Chase Bank. 18+ UK.
Okay. Ads are about to start, so we're going to go do that. 3 minutes. Be right back. Thanks so much, everybody, for coming. And, yeah, we'll be right back.
Max 12 legs for Bet Builder. Features apply on eligible player or fixture markets. Bet restrictions, T's and C's and exclusions apply. Eligible customers only. 18+. Please play responsibly. Visit gambleaware.org.
Alrighty, welcome back. We are, as usual, going to do a karate break. Now, unfortunately, our space is decreased yet again. So my son got a drum kit. So, good times. Also, I haven't taken this stuff to the charity shop. So, that's going to be something we do tomorrow, I think. Wait a sec. Are those my Jenga blocks? Those might be my Jenga blocks. No, I'm pretty sure we have another set. I just can't find them at this exact moment in time. It's fine. We're gonna do brown belt form, I suppose. Try to do Nyanchi again without looking at our notes, but we'll see. So, Nyanchi is a little bit different from the other forms in that it is entirely done sideways. So we're essentially working on a thin strip of land, say, on a rice paddy, or, and yes, that is where it originally came from, or we're in a thin alleyway. So, either way, the idea here is that we have attackers coming from either side, and we have a limited amount of space in front of us to do anything. So, alright. So, Nyanchi 1 goes... it has been a really long time since I've done this. We go... down like this, we cross our legs. Then, as we step over, this is going to be a chop, followed by an elbow, followed by a down block shift to the other side, and then let's see, and then this pops across like that. There we go. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we do a floor sweep, which can either be stepping over the body that you just put on the ground, or it can also be an actual sweep of somebody's leg who's in front of you. You're just basically using your toes to snag their heel and kick their leg out from under them. So we go from here, cross back over, and then when we step the other foot down, we roll the hip back and do a double punch. So 1 down, 1 up. And then, let's see. Go. Cross. And we do a, it's either a block or a strike here and a block down here. And then we repeat the same pattern here. So this is going to be a here. You know what? I think this is actually just the open strike palm to the neck, followed by elbow, down block, punch that way, and step back. Oh no, that was right. Okay, so I did it wrong. Start over. All right, so we go this way. Again, open palm strike, followed by elbow smash, down block, and I forget what that one's called. It's a punch across your own sternum that way. Step 1, 2. As soon as we step that down, we roll, pop. I was just about to do something else. No, that's right. And then we do the block, cross, come around, uppercut. And then we step up. Nope. Forgot the hand motion. Step up, block out, step up, block across. And then here, this is where we do the same on the other side. I forgot the double punch too. We're supposed to do a double punch. Start over.
Wherever you go to let go, save up to 50% with cross-country standard advance tickets. Cross-country, take us on your journey. T's and C's apply. See cross-country website for details.
There we go. Nyanshi 2 is very similar. However, we end up doing a lot more kicking. Gonna have to look that one up again. We also have Parker Square shirt. That is from Number File. That is from Matt Parker's Magic Square. Can you make a magic square of squares? Video. So if anybody somehow hasn't seen that yet, highly recommend. Good comedy. And I especially like the end part where he tells Brady, no, please don't make merch about my inability to do something. Okay, so if we thin slice the challenge, this allows students to have little tiny gradations between every individual challenge rating and the next challenge rating, which then allows their ability to grow kind of in a stair-step pattern as the challenge increases. Again, you don't want this to end up being some massive challenge change or challenge increase, because then they're going to get frustrated with the items that you have. Okay, and again, according to our ability versus challenging, or challenge versus ability. graph. Again, our optimal is here, and the outer edges are here. When we thin slice, this essentially turns into something that looks hopefully more like this. And again, every student is going to start in a different place, right? You're going to have students who are all over the board at the very beginning. What you want is that every group of students hopefully is going to eventually do something like this. Right, this is your goal. It may not be realistic, but you know. You want to try to take as many students as possible and bring them into that optimal experience right along y equals x here, where our challenge and our ability are increasing in unison with each other. It'd be great. Probably not going to happen, but it's fine. Right, and thin slicing sequences stand in contrast to thick slicing sequences, like in the tax collector, ice cream cones, and wine chest problems that we had in previous chapters. Increase in challenge from one part to the next is much greater. So we had these giant steps in increase in ability and increase in challenge. As mentioned, the benefit of thin slicing sequences of thinking tasks is that it helps avoid frustration. The drawback is that groups can move through the tasks very quickly, putting extreme pressure on you to get to the groups that are done before they get bored. In the algebra sequence seen earlier, I've seen groups dispense with one task every 3 to 4 minutes. If there are 10 groups in the room, getting to every single group in time becomes impossible, and the groups start to get bored, unless you have mobilized the knowledge in the classroom, like from Chapter 8, where we discussed if you get them to be autonomous and start looking around the room for any problems they have not tried yet. Right? Tell them. You can even tell them, look for something that looks like your problem, but only has one change to it. You can say, you know, the numbers can all be individually different values, that's fine. But what I want you to do is look for something that only changes one little thing. The structure of the problem only changes one thing. Once that happens, students begin to use the autonomy afforded to them to keep themselves in flow by stealing the next task from the group around them. Essentially, increasing the challenge of the tasks all by themselves. You can help make this easier by setting a rule that whatever task they're currently working on needs to be written at the top of whatever vertical surface they're working on, thereby also making it easier for others to steal it too. When I ran the algebra sequence with that group of 5th graders, I gave out each task to only 1 or 2 groups. The rest of the groups got their next task by stealing it from everybody else, and when they were ready for it, and to keep themselves in flow. This frees up the teacher from spending more time attending to groups whom, despite your best efforts, there is an imbalance between their ability and challenge, and they start to head off for frustration. This will happen, and when it does, you intervene and give a hint. Okay, there are 2 types of hints. Hints that decrease challenge, and hints that increase ability. The first of these is quicker to give and either requires you to give a partial answer to the solution or to shift them onto an easier task. The second, increasing ability, takes longer and requires you to either remind them of a strategy or to give them the strategy. For me, that's kind of a last resort, but nonetheless. You can give them the appropriate strategy to use if there is not enough time for them to attempt multiple strategies. Other than how long it takes to give these hints, the main difference is that the hints that decrease challenge are useful in that moment only. Though I would disagree somewhat. If you shift them to an easier task, this can be a strategy for them to start using later on. And saying like, okay, so we can't figure out this thing because it's too great of a challenge for us. However, is there a similar problem that we would be able to figure out? Is there a similar problem that we know how to do? And that is a valid strategy for a lot of mathematics. Going in and saying, okay, look, this is too hard, but if we were to change the language a little bit, or, try a different particular set of scenarios, that becomes an easier task. And again, it's a valid strategy for a lot of mathematics that are out there. Whereas hints that increase ability continue to be useful even as students move on to the next task. So remind them of strategies that they already have. That's helpful, right? It makes sure that they, oh, right, I have that ability. Hey, why don't we go do that? Right? This is another thing that you could do for if your friend needs help on a Metroidvania, right? I don't know how to get to this thing. Really? Okay, well, why don't you think about what kinds of strategies you have? What items have you already picked up? What do they allow you to do? Let's talk about that. Let's think about it. Or, again, give them the appropriate strategy to use is not quite the best idea. To say, hey, you need to use a super bomb. Right? That doesn't quite give them the ability to remind themselves later on that, oh yeah, I have this. It does help them in that moment, and maybe they'll realize it in the future. Oh right, I've got the super bomb, because we thought about that like a little while ago. Okay, never mind. Sorry. Had an item over there, but it wasn't from today. So, it was from yesterday's stream, which was still today. By 3 minutes. Okay. So again, reminding them of strategies, I think, is the better option. Shift to an easier task is an option, which I would consider a lower priority. or something that would be a more extreme version of decreasing the challenge. Again, that is still getting them to do that for themselves can be a valid strategy for later. Reminding them to walk through all of their strategies. Outer Wilds, check your ship logs, right? Hey, you've got your ship log. Why don't you go check that? Oh, right. Okay. Reminding of strategies. Right? You're not going to tell them to do the thing that they need for this particular area. You're going to remind them to go check the logs, check what other things they have available to them, what tools do you have, and that helps later on. Okay, one sec here. Um, 35. Cool. Okay. For example, if factoring quadratic sequences is used, you'll eventually get some groups working on 6x squared plus 13x plus 5. If a group is struggling with this one, right, you can tell them that the first term in the binomials will be the following, or you can write the first two terms on the board for them. This is an example of how to reduce challenge. Alternatively, you can ask them to tell you how they think the last term in the trinomial will be factored. I might prefer the first, but again, if it's 6x squared, okay. When they tell you that the term of the product is the second terms in the binomials, you can either smile and walk away, or you can mention that maybe they should use that same thinking to consider the leading coefficient in the trinomial. This hint takes longer, but it mobilizes and repurposes knowledge they already have, and is an example of a hint that increases ability. So, obviously hints that increase ability are better in the long run, but frustration is not about the long run. Frustration is an intensely negative emotion that needs rapid intervention, and sometimes the best way to intervene quickly is to reduce the challenge. Of course, the imbalance can be tipped the other direction as well. The ability of the group exceeds the challenge of the task, and they start to head for boredom. The obvious thing to do in those situations is to increase the challenge. Right, so again, use this, use extensions to maintain flow, or use hints to maintain flow. There's more than one way to regain the balance between the ability of the group and the challenge of the task. Rather than shift the task the group is working on, we can also shift their mode of engagement with the same task. For example, when the students are solving a task, their mode of engagement is doing. They're doing the task. This is the easiest way to engage with the task. If I tell the group that is finished that they're wrong, or ask them if they would bet $100 on their answer and then walk away, I shifted their mode of engagement from doing to justifying. So one way to do this is to say, okay, they've got this doing task, so they have to do the mathematics itself. Once they've done that, then again, Peter says, if we shift them to justifying their solution, would you bet $100 on that? Now they better be sure. How can they be sure? They can be shifted again into an explaining mode. They can then be shifted again into teaching mode. So if they're starting to get bored, hey, would you mind trying to teach that group over there? Not just tell them the answer, like start asking the same sorts of questions that I asked you. And then if somebody's again heading for boredom again, can you create the next problem? I want you to do the next. I want you to like do a challenge problem. Because you made it to the end of all this stuff, right? What would be an example of a challenge problem? Go for it. Explaining is harder than justifying as it requires articulation of thought for an audience outside of those who did the original thinking. The group will not likely be good at explaining the first time around, so I may have to tell them to come get me when they can explain to me in a way that I understand. When this happens, they do a good job of explaining, I may point them toward another group and tell them to teach them something. If we subscribe to the notion that teaching is different than telling or explaining, this is yet another increase to the challenge. Once a group has finished teaching, I may ask them to create a new task for that group. Creating is the most difficult mode of engagement. It requires the group to not only see the didactics of the situation, but also the pedagogical needs and affordances of the next task. My research showed that this sequence of modes of engagement, doing, justifying, explaining, teaching, creating, not only increases challenge, but also does so in a way that can continue to engage or re-engage even the strongest group. It also explains why students often have a difficult time explaining their thinking. We're asking them to go straight from doing to explaining without justifying. So get the students to justify their answers, make sure that they can then back up their thinking, and then work on explaining why their answer is the way it is. Bottom line with all of this is that the goal of building thinking classrooms is not to find engaging tasks for students to think about. The goal is to build engaged students that are willing to think about any task. We achieve this through thinking tasks, visibly random groups, vertical non-permanent surfaces, defronting the classroom, answering only keep thinking questions, giving tasks verbally early and with the students clustered around, giving check your understanding questions rather than homework, and mobilizing knowledge in the classroom. Once we have this, we can point the thinking classroom at curriculum. Because curriculum tasks are not innately engaging for students, we need to manufacture engagement through giving clear goals, ensuring there is an ability to get immediate feedback on actions, and asynchronously maintaining the balance between the group's ability and the challenge of the task at hand through the use of hints and extensions. When we do this, not only do we make curriculum more engaging, but we also create the possibility of covering a large amount of curriculum in a short amount of time. Alrighty. So, if this is so effective, FAQ section, should I be doing this every day? Yes and no. No, because you can't start the school off like this, the school year off like this. You need to begin by using highly engaging, non-curricular thinking tasks to build the culture of thinking in your classroom. Non-curricular tasks are also good to use whenever you introduce a new thinking practice into your classroom. This is why every previous chapter ends with one. For the rest of the time, the answer is yes. If you want your students to be thinking, they need to be engaged. And for them to be engaged, they need to be in flow. This chapter outlines the best way we have found to keep students in flow while working on curricular content. In all sample examples that were provided in this chapter, the first tasks students were asked to solve was very easy. Doesn't this risk them becoming bored? If the students are relying on you to get to them before they can go on to a more challenging task, then yes. But if they are stealing tasks from others, then this is not an issue. On the positive side, starting with a very easy task increases the chances that all groups are able to start at all. A lot of topics we teach draw on students' prior knowledge, but sometimes we teach topics that are brand new to the students. Normally, this requires a long lecture to orient them toward the topic and teach them how to do the tasks that are coming. How do we deal with these situations inside of the thinking classroom framework? Prior to reading this chapter, many teachers would say the exact same thing about both solving 1- and 2-step equations and factoring quadratics. And yet, neither of these needed a long introduction to teach students how to do it. As teachers, we often design our lessons to prepare students to answer the hardest tasks they will face. When using flow, our teacher needs only to prepare them for the first task to help them deal with the next task. This does not mean that you can't just tell them something to get them started, but based on the results from Chapter 6, you have a maximum of 5 minutes to do it. In the Chapter 1 FAQ, I gave an example of a script for introducing the Pythagorean theorem in less than 5 minutes. Also, don't forget, while students are working their way through the sequence of tasks, you're still in the room. The instruction you would normally give at the beginning of the lesson can now become hints that you use when you need to keep groups moving further up the flow channel. Knowledge mobility aside, wouldn't it just be easier to give the group the whole list of tasks they need to work through? We thought so too at first, but repeated attempts at making this work always produce the same result: a dramatic shift from trying to learn and trying to solve the tasks to just getting it done. We do not want this to become a checklist. We want this to be a genuine, students feel like they just want to do it because it's cool. They just want to do it because they want to figure it out. They need to figure it out. The more you shift it toward, I need to do this checklist, the more it's going to start looking less interesting to them. They're going to want to get it done. They're going to cheat in order to get it done. You remember we were talking about that a few times ago. Students stop caring about being in the moment and making sure that everyone in the group understood. Instead, the list provides a finish line and they want to cross it as fast as possible. So usually the strongest member in the group just took the marker and off they went. Incidentally, we saw the same results when we allowed groups to sit down when they had finished their sequence of tasks. The fact that groups got to be finished indicated there was a finish line, and then the race was on. In addition, groups who did not finish began to feel anxious about their work and the fact that they were still standing up when everybody else is sitting down. So, you have to have essentially an endless supply of problems. Or we increase the challenge rating from just doing the problems to being able to justify, being able to explain, being able to teach somebody else and being able to create the next problem for, that group over there. One of the elements needed in order to make flow work is immediate feedback on action. The factoring and algebra examples you gave have this built in. What do I do when the task does not provide that sort of feedback by itself? The task is not the only or even best source of feedback available to the students. The best sources of feedback come from within the group and from the other groups around them. Multiple minds thinking together about the same task often provide all of the feedback that is needed as they check their own work. Another source of feedback in the room is you as the teacher, naturally. However, there is a delicate line between providing feedback and answering the stop thinking type questions. As mentioned in Chapter 5, an easy way to avoid falling into this wrong side of that line is to enter a group with questions rather than answers. So why did you do that? Can you tell me what you're doing here? The explanation of flow is very clear for an individual, but a group is not a single entity. It's made up of 3 individuals, all of whom are unique. How can we guarantee that they're all in the same place on this graph? Students are all unique, and as a result, there is a strong chance that each student is in a different place on that graph. But a group is more than a collection of individuals. It is a collective. And when a collective is working on something new, they often emerge as one entity. Take the example of factoring quadratics. This is a new topic to students. When we watch groups work on this, we often observe students of varying abilities coming together in the group and performing as one, completing each other's thoughts and moving forward with this energy and synergy. This does not always happen, and there may be a student who is falling behind from the rest of the group. Sometimes it's 2 students falling behind, and a single student who's already built understanding is wanting to storm ahead. In these situations, you simply give the marker to the student who's falling behind and make it clear to the stronger student that the group does not get to move until everybody in the group understands what's happening on the current task. Careful questioning on your part can verify whether or not this is true. I'm a little out of practice now, but that's pretty much how I operate most of the time anyway, is I'm asking a lot of questions. And whenever I come up with a particular topic, I ask a lot of questions of the students to make sure that they're where I need them to be. That they have any particular misconception, I can pretty much pin it down as far as what the misconception is and how to fix it. Again, I've been out of the classroom for almost 2 years now, so it's a little bit different, but nonetheless. If there is a student who's operating well above the rest of the group and wants to teach by telling, then have a private conversation with that individual about the different modes of engagement and how you are challenging them to teach rather than do. Alternatively, if there's a student operating well behind the rest of the class, then working with that student in the period beforehand to prepare them for the coming task is often helpful in making them a relevant member of the group. We call this preloading. So if you have time available to preload a student whom you know is going to fall behind, right? Excellent. What if a group struggles on one of the tasks in the sequence but eventually answers it? Do I still give them the next task? No. If a group is struggling, the next task they get is similar to the one they just completed. The completion of a task does not necessarily mean that their ability has grown as much as it can. Another task at the same challenge level will allow their ability to grow more before the challenge increases. What this means is that you need to enter the lesson not just with a single sequence of progressively more challenging questions, but also a sequence of parallel tasks of comparable challenge level. I notice that sometimes a group is working on a task that's too hard or too easy for them, but they still manage to stay in flow. What's that about? It turns out that figure 9.1 is incomplete. my research on building thinking classrooms revealed that there are actually 2 more regions within this flow diagram. So we go back to the flow diagram that we had back here. Right, let's take this one. It's got the least amount of other extra stuff on it. Okay, if we copy this, and then we take that over here. Oh, it's here. Alright, so let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of these. Right. So, Peter says that this diagram is actually incomplete. What really happens here is we also have 2 additional regions. In addition to boredom and frustration. He also worked out with a psychologist that this tiny section at the bottom, where students are riding that line between flow and boredom, is patience. So this is where students are not quite in flow state, but they have the patience to say, okay, we can wait just a minute or two to see if this pans out into something different. Similarly, at the top, just before students reach a frustration state, they can also reach this perseverance state. Right, so when you start getting out of flow, you can start getting into either patience or perseverance. And this is also one of the places where you start engaging with your students to try to pull them back into the flow state best you can. These regions act as buffers between flow and frustration and flow and boredom, and allow groups to operate out of balance without disengaging them. This gives groups time to autonomously pull themselves back into flow by looking to the groups around them for either a hint or extension to make sure that they can come back into that flow state. I feel like my students currently don't have any perseverance or patience. How do I increase this? Both of these increase from repeated opportunities to work in flow. There's another reason why it's so important to use highly engaging non-curricular thinking tasks when you build a thinking classroom, and occasionally thereafter. In those cases, right, you build in tasks which naturally become frustrating if students end up struggling too hard against them and not having the ability to complete them, at least not in their entirety. And again, my goodness, I'm like really itchy. And again, if students are on the border of boredom, they can start getting that patience. And if you start building out more opportunities for flow state, then the students end up riding those lines a little bit more, and the perseverance and patience can become a bit bigger, start pushing the boredom and frustration away from the main body of the flow state. You mentioned how important it is to have carefully constructed sequences of tasks. At the same time, you mentioned that we should rely on students' autonomy to steal the next task. What if students pick the tasks out of sequence? Doesn't that mess up the flow? In the beginning, it's important that the sequence of tasks is maintained. But as students' perseverance and patience increases, The sequence becomes less critical as the groups become more able to cope with imbalances between their ability and the challenge of the task at hand. And again, if you tell them, look for stuff that's similar to yours that you haven't done yet, most of the time they're going to pick the stuff that they're supposed to within a step or two. Where can I get such a sequence of tasks with progressively increasing challenge along with parallel tasks? The lists of exercises in textbooks are, for the most part, designed exactly in this way. But be critical. Textbook exercises are designed for practice and not thinking and learning, so they do not always adhere to the ideas of variation discussed earlier. But don't underestimate your own ability to make such a sequence. Teachers who are teaching a curriculum that they're familiar with can sit down and create these sequences for themselves without pretty much any effort at all. Regardless, go into a lesson with a longer sequence than you think you're going to need. It's better to not complete a sequence than it is to have students shoot through your planning in the first 6 minutes, which has happened many times. Unit 8 on derivatives. Right? Sequence of curricular concepts that can be used to build a flow sequence of tasks in calculus, for example. You began this chapter by talking about differentiation. Differentiation is normally seen as providing students with different tasks and activities based on their abilities. Does your use of flow put forward a different way to operationalize differentiation? Whoa. Big words. Yes, in this framework, every group starts in the exact same place, with the same task. What is differentiated then becomes more about the timing and pacing each group has of the tasks. However, as in all forms of differentiation, the teacher plays a vital role in this process, deciding when a group needs a hint or an extension, or maybe to do a different task of the same challenge level. This differs from the more conventional idea of differentiation that's based on the in-the-moment information about how a group and the individuals in that group are performing, rather than the pre-considered anticipations, expectations, and sometimes even assumptions or biases of how they might perform. Okay, so what does that mean? Major macro move, of course. Ugh. Build and maintain flow through the asynchronous use of hints and extensions. Micro moves. Make groups responsible for the learning of every group member. Ugh. Close. Have groups write the current task up top. Right? So take that, write it at the top of their vertical surface so that everybody in the room can see which one they're working on, which then allows everybody else to be able to steal that problem when they feel they're ready for it. Start with low challenge. tasks to ensure all groups start in flow. Best you can. Doesn't always work, but you know, you try. Okay, and create sequences. Of tasks that get incrementally harder, more challenging, by varying one thing at a time. And then create parallel sequences of tasks so that you can pull from that list if you need extras. So you can say, all right, look, I've got, 3 extra problems that anybody can work on if they're struggling with any of these particular sections. Things to think about. What are some of the things in this chapter that immediately feel correct? I mean, flow state. Definitely been in it before. Certainly while doing streaming, playing games, all that good stuff. And yes, even while doing some mathematics, while teaching, while doing all this other stuff, there have been plenty of times when I've hit a flow state and just been like, I get it. Pick a topic you have just finished teaching and try to build a sequence incrementally of more challenging tasks that cuts through a part or all of the topic. I'm not going to do that right now. We're just about out of time on this. And we're just about to hit ads again. I've already snoozed it. We'll keep snoozing it until we end up leaving. So try to build a sequence of incrementally more challenging tasks that cut through a part or all of the topic. So try and figure out if there is a way to get this gradated series of thinking tasks that's going to get students changing one thing at a time through all of the stuff that you need to end up teaching. All right, now do the same thing for the next topic you'll be teaching, and then suddenly you've got a lesson for tomorrow. Think about a topic that you believe is brand new to students. What is the minimum set of instructions you need to give in order to prepare students to be able to think their way through the first task you would ask them to do? What can students learn from that task? Do you think your students have developed the autonomy they need to allow them to help themselves stay in flow? If not, reread Chapter 8 and think about how you can continue to further their growth in this area. This does not mean you can't start to play with creating and maintaining flow. Flow is a great context in which to keep working on mobilizing knowledge to build students' autonomy. And again, all you're really doing is you're saying, I would like you to go over to that group and talk with them about their solution, and how it's the same, and how it's different, and how it's cool, and how it's whatever else. Have you seen instances where your groups exhibit tremendous perseverance or patience while working in a thinking classroom setting? If so, could they have done this at the beginning of the school year? There were many cases in which I was able to find a student or a group of students who worked really hard towards something, and they were like trying to help cheer each other on and that sort of stuff. And yeah, it wouldn't have happened at the beginning of the year. They needed that familiarity with each other in order to figure out group dynamic in terms of like, I remember this person really likes it when I cheer them on. What are some of the challenges you anticipate you'll experience in implementing the strategies suggested in this chapter? What are some ways to overcome? So I think the greatest challenge that I had was keeping an eye on all groups at all times and being able to get them to keep in mind, right? Most of these people are adults. They're over 18. Most of them were 18 to 25. And getting them to work together was not a problem. It was very easy. Getting them to actually work on the problem and not socialize it was a much bigger issue. But it took a bit of time. But we eventually worked out some ways in which trying to get them to focus on the activity at hand and then go look at other groups and say, I gotta go get some information from those guys.